personal initiatives with institutional responsibility, which Thomas has written a lot about, and connecting that all the way back now to reforms, the actual conditions, structural conditions that we need to think about and address in order to bring about in order to reduce inequality and to create sort of meaningful and lasting, I would say, legislative reform if we're thinking about constitutional or legislative changes. So I think that reform happens, as Jeff was saying. I mean, we do have to be thinking at the global level. We do think at the institutional level, but we also need to think about what motivates political change, and that's often political movements. And those movements come about by creating a common purpose and by creating a dialogue and a community that will really come together and mobilize around those issues. And that's something our moderator, Doug Sutherland, has been doing for a long time in Connecticut with, as part of the Democracy for America organization, Fairfield County chapter. And he's going to talk about that organization and who started it and what its function is. But also, for people who don't know, the reason I got involved in politics at the local level and then at the state level is because Doug and his wife Terry knocked on my door when Doug was running for state representative in the position that I ran.
You say because, that's interesting. Was that a cause or a reason?
Sorry. Was that a cause?
It was a cause.
It was a cause.
But there must have been reasons too.
There were reasons. I was looking to get involved. But they really facilitated that for me, that involvement.
The soil was fertile.
Yeah. So I appreciate that. For me, it's a pleasure to now be working with Doug because we've been doing work together for the past couple of years, connecting these local issues, particularly to statewide issues. And just let you introduce yourself, Doug, and the DFA, and then we can start talking.
Okay, good. Well, I thank Sujata for inviting me to this. Like she said, I'm the chairman of Democracy for America, Fairfield County. We also go by the name Democracy for Connecticut. And we are the Connecticut chapter of an organization, a national organization called Democracy for America, which was started by Howard Dean in 2004. Locals may remember Howard Dean. He was the governor of Vermont, then he ran for president, and then he became chairman of the Democratic National Committee. And he started this organization. It's a progressive organization. We basically try to drive change from the grassroots level. We try to recruit and train progressive candidates to run for office. We try to help them get elected at the national, state, and local level. My group is loosely associated with that group. We are not we don't spend money directly on campaigns, so we're not involved in any of the corruption that we're talking about here. So we're not a 501c3 or C4. We try to focus on people power. And so we have done training workshops to train candidates on how to run for office. Sometimes we have endorsed candidates, but when we do that, we basically support them through boots on the ground, making phone calls, knocking on doors, that kind of thing. I try to avoid dealing with money because then you have to file reports with the State Elections Commission and with the Internal Revenue Service, so we try to avoid all of that. So basically what we do is we meet generally once a month at the Silver Star Diner down in Norwalk. It's just down I-95 from here. And we eat dinner in the main dining room at the diner and we talk progressive politics. And so I try to have interesting speakers come to talk about issues that I think are important at the moment and are important to our state. Sometimes we'll have politicians come, especially if it's election season, and we try to hold them accountable for the things that we want them to do. We recently, last month we had an affordable housing forum to talk about affordable housing. It turns out Connecticut, one thing I learned out of that was Connecticut's one of the most segregated states in the country. You would think that the most segregated states would be down south. Not true. We're a very segregated state.
More than any state in the South.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, we've talked about educational inequality, which is a big problem here in Connecticut. Access to health care. I'm deeply involved in free trade agreements, trying to get a real North American free trade agreement that's actually better than the one that we've been dealing with for the last 25 years. We deal with gun violence, climate change issues. So that's basically, what we do. We discuss these amongst our members, and we invite politicians to come and talk to us about it. And we try to also drive pressure on our people in Hartford, our state representatives, to do things that we want them to do. So basically, that's where I come into this picture. And for a brief period of time, I ran for town council in my town of Crumble, and I ran for state rep, and then I recruited other people to step up and do that. So I did so-so in my town. Sujata did better, and we hope that she's going to run again. So thanks for inviting me. So I'm quite sure where to kick this off, but I wanted to say something to Jeff. Can you tell the story about the senator who was in the well of the state legislature and was handing out envelopes of cash? You know the story I'm telling, right? I'm asking you about.
Which one would that be?
Would that be Missouri or Montana?
The reason I said, I was only saying a bit in yes. I actually
So
don't remember the Missouri one, but I remember well, and I can't remember which congressman. It actually happened on the floor of Congress, too.
Oh, was it? Oh,
Yeah, when, and it might have been Boehner, was handing out envelopes with checks while there was a vote on the tobacco, when they were trying to get immunity for the tobacco companies. Like they got immunity for the gun companies, they got immunity for Monsanto, basically. Some of the biggest actors in industrial.
But when I was thinking about that,
America can actually get Congress to pass a law just to prevent them from being able to be sued.
right.
And so the tobacco companies were handing out checks through Boehner.
But I think even earlier than that, back before senators were elected.
Oh, you mean back in the day? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah. So when the senators, well, yeah, that just proves again. It's back. The current handing out of cash is similar to the kind of way politics was done in the Gilded Age.
Right. There were senators used to be
Sort of like the
elected
new
by the
Gilded
state
Age.
legislatures.
U.S. senators used to be appointed by state legislatures.
Right.
That's how they.
And I think it was in Montana.
It was Montana,
Right.
and it was the guy actually got. I'm trying to remember his name now, but he was a big industrialist in Montana and handed out bags. Of
He wanted to be
cash.
senator, and so he went to the
So
well.
that's how he got into the
legislature.
U.S. Senate, and that in large part led to the 17th Amendment. of the
Right.
US
Yeah. People were
Constitution.
so outraged that the guy was boldly handing out cash. And
But it was actually common at the time, just like, it's not that surprising to know the Speaker of the House is handing out tobacco checks. At the time, that was standard business. That was one that was so open and flagrant.
Right.
But there's a cartoon that Doris Kearns Goodwin, who's on our advisory council, shares, and it was these big, large plutocrat-like people, and it was they were the senators, and it said that the senator for steel, the senator for railroads, the senator, and each of the senators was representing one of the big businesses.
Right. I think one suggestion has been that our senators wear logo jumpsuits like NASCAR. Who are you representing? So I'm being
Like the NASCAR races.
Right. Right.
Can I-
Yeah, but
Oh,
that could be the suggestion to better off this. Because I understood the spirit of the amendment, but I didn't really understand what is a better system. So could you tell any country that you think is better than the United States for financing?
Well, I
Because-
learned a lot about Australia from my friend Elliot here. I think,
Yeah, but
I think some of the
Australia, of course, is a great country, but when we talk about more here in the Western world, more close to the United States, Europe, because all the countries will be corrupt in your sense. That's my feeling. I don't know in Australia how to do the financing for parties. So,
yeah.
I mean, everybody will be corrupt.
No, believe me, we're called American Promise because we believe in America. I think it's, the total best hope for mankind, as Lincoln said. It's a relative scale, obviously. The story from Kenya, puts you in a humble position if you're complaining about some corruption here, right? So I get it that it's
that's why you need to do
it's a
something.
relative thing, but here's the reason the amendment's so important, in my view, is what's at stake is actually whether we're going to be a government of human beings. And I think that's a stake everywhere, but the U.S. has the only thing we have as a country, as why we're Americans, is that we have that shared belief. And that's why we come from all over the world to be here and have this shared belief that, all right, we're all equal citizens, doesn't matter where you came from, and we all have the same rights to speak and to be heard and to be represented. If I'm right, and you can argue with me, but if I'm right,
you are right.
then unlimited money is going to ruin that. Then a better system
In
is
the
to say,
21st century, you are right. Of course, if you're talking about 30 years ago, it would be a completely different assessment you're doing about the United States. If you were the 19th century, it would be completely different.
oh, it's always different, right? So
Yeah,
what
so-
I'm thinking about, what does it look
So
like?
the last 20 years, you're right. Or 30
Yeah.
years, I think you are right. But my concept, I think, is very interesting what you're doing. But there are other aspects also about your structure here in the West that always surprise me. For instance, to be an attorney general and a lawyer, there is no conflict of interest. A judge to be elected.
No, so
So
when
I
I was,
got emails from my friends from the law firms that I work with. Oh, Antonio, come here for the cocktail, for judge, whatever, to be elected. Could you contribute for the election? So you elected the judge, but you elected the judge by the law firms itself provide money to the judge to be elected. So there are a lot of patterns that you could criticize,
Yeah.
but I think it's still, since the institutions are very strong in the United States, you are able to, of course, to criticize, not as in Kenya that you make you feel you criticize. But so just my question was that, just elaborating a little bit more. So what would be a better system? I understand what you are trying to do. I think it's wonderful to say, okay, let's at least let the legislators to decide what policy will be.
yeah, so
At least to do that. But after that, you need to think, what would be that policy? Because it could be worse than I stop talking. But the example in Brazil, that you have public funding. The Supreme Court decided that corporations could not provide money to the parties. It was, I don't know, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Felipe, was not 3 years ago, 4 years ago, that the Supreme Court prohibited to the financing. So what happened now? The Congress is debating how much billions they have to share in public funds to share among the parties. So you see how terrible it is right now. So the presidents are kind of owners of the parties, the leaders of the parties. They are getting $100 million, $200 million to share with the current candidates. So that's
Let me let Anat respond, and do you want to come? Jen, let me just let Anat respond and then
Yeah, I'm a little worried about the emphasis suddenly moving to, is America great or greatest honest? And if we're under the umbrella of equality and inequality, then true, we heard certain things about Kenya, but the Gini index all over the world that measures inequality doesn't put America up at the top at all. In fact, it's true that South America is in the middle, sort of. Africa is in bad shape. But if you talk about the OECD countries, for instance, America and Israel are in the worst place for equality. And I'm put to mind again of what Thomas said yesterday when we were talking about atrocities, that it depends how you define and measure atrocities, but the atrocities that America has engaged in all over the world are at a nice level compared to other places. So I don't think this is here a trial, is America great or not? But I don't know that I would look to America as the great emblem of equality.
yeah.
You're right about certain democratic procedures, but about equality, I'm not sure.
So I have sort of 2 points. And one, I want to answer your question, what would be a better system? And meaning what the amendment is trying to do, and why are we doing this amendment? But I also want to clarify, when I'm saying American promise, and it's not like, oh, America's great, and let's make America great again, or all that. It's about the promise is this idea, right, that we're all created equal, and we're going to do this crazy thing of having people be able to govern ourselves, not class, not kings, not. So I know it's cliche, but it's actually that is the question we're all trying to wrestle with, right? Is that if we're whatever nation we are, if we're making political decisions and allocating power and wealth and dealing with questions of equality, the fundamental question about who decides those questions is really important, right? And the track we're on now in America, which is what I know, so it gets back to the question, Sujata, about your personal responsibility. I don't know Brazil, I don't know Kenya, I know my home, and I see a terrible, terrible problem that my kids are going to inherit a country where all those things are gone, you know, that we're equal citizens, that we just accept $100 million elections and that wealthy people get to decide the big questions and everyone else lives with the results. So I don't want that. So the amendment gives us the power to fix it, but what we decide to do to fix it will be the messy process, and we'll make bad decisions and good decisions, and I couldn't be a lawyer as in the Attorney General's office, you have to do one or the other, but the Attorney General is holding a fundraiser next week where I've been asked to be on the fundraising committee at $1,000 a piece, and that Attorney General deals with all of us as lawyers. That's common, and that's not good, I grant you, and we have to fix that. But that's the kind of corruption that we can work on. But if we break down the basic constitutional checks and balances against corruption in America, I think we'll be in trouble in America. And somebody else said, you know, that the world actually suffers when America goes down too. So that's all. Thank you.
I read the Democracy of America, the Alexander. The most impressive thing is the form of the democracy is made in America. A lot of debate, the participation. I think the system don't be permit the pollution of this richest thing America do. This debate, this participation, it's the most important. If we permit the power, economic power, pollution, this richest, this principal thing, it's the risk if Americans, all of words, but Americans don't accept it. I like the American democracy because this vitality here exists in the United States and different to other countries. I think the proposal is to make secure this principle.
I might ask you a question. You've implemented a lot of changes over the last, 10 years, 9 years. What was the model that you were using? Was a lot of this derived from looking at the American system? What was your model when you were trying to strengthen your anti-corruption policies?
The plea bargain actually was something that we see America using.
Which?
Plea bargain.
Plea bargains, yeah.
The Attorney General said Boston law was his inspiration.
Our anti-corruption law is similar than American law and American it's an anti-corruption here.
FCT.
And in England there's a law on corruption. Inspiration of the Brazilian law is the American and the England law.
I just want to echo what Anand said, because I think maybe we don't, for me at least, I don't think we want to be comparing which system is the best, because American liberalism has always come at the cost of its exclusionary practices, and even at the time, right, most of the country was not voting or eligible to vote, or was defined out as being irrational and not fitting into, right, the classifications that would permit someone to be considered fully capable of reasoning. And so that in itself we just keep in mind. I think what's a more important conversation, for me at least in a contemporary context, comes to maybe most importantly what Thomas talked about is institutional responsibility, and then what Isaac talked about is what do we do as individuals. The reason for me campaign finance should be the first and the primary political issue we talk about now, because and this is anecdotally, but from running in a town that leans to the right, and talking to both conservatives and progressives, it is the one issue that there is broad consensus on. Broad consensus. You know, I mean, there is not a single person that disagrees with that, which means you have political momentum. And I wanted to just use your comments about outrage, but all of the times that we've actually had movement and we've actually had legislation passed usually came from a response to corruption, a response to, it was an outrage of some act of you know, some exacerbated act of political inequality that really then, you know, spurred a political movement. And I think that's what we should focus on now, because I think, and again, just having done some of the work on the ground and having these conversations, and Connecticut is the one place where you do go door to door, you do knock, and you do have to talk to people. That is the one issue that doesn't seem to divide anybody. And yet we're getting not very much political traction for the, you said 80%, you felt in trouble, it felt like 90% of people, you know, but 80% statistically, that's significant to me. And that's something I think we need to capitalize on now, because we're going to lose that momentum. You know, and I think if we can get that kind of reform. So the question isn't necessarily what's the best system, right? We have to work with the imperfections we have now. And in fact, the amendment is fairly conservative, right? It's just an amendment to go back to what we had. I would say we even need more reforms, right? But the question is if we can mobilize on that.
One in the same. If we talk about the pool tax, the 27th amendment, the pool tax is the...
yeah,
or the 13th amendment abolishes slavery. We are talking about amendments that were an end in itself. Once they were approved, they accomplished something. So when you said you cannot prevent someone to vote because the person did not pay tax, is an end in itself. This is only a mean. I think it's very important. You are open a way. Say, okay, let the legislators to decide what would be this system. I agree that's important, but I understand that you needed to discuss the second part after it is enacted. A gateable accomplishment. So what next? So that's my only concern. That the amendment is only an important way, but it's not an end in itself. I mean, that's
right. And I think the end is the process that we talk.
That's the point.
And that's
what is
amendments that like that. You know,
the others are
putting political equality back into the Constitution, which is really important. But we know in the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, 100 years later, we're still trying to get equal rights. Right? Women got the right to vote in 1920. 100 years later, we're still trying to get equal rights based on gender. So I'm not under a delusion that the amendment is the end. The amendment's the beginning, but it's a necessary beginning, I think. But there's a lot.
There's a lot more.
A lot more to do. Yeah.
I would just like to know, in Brazil, how were you able to accomplish, getting these changes relatively quickly? Was there some outrage that suddenly
was this national commotion? People went to the streets asking for changes, but it was naturally everybody one day everybody said, "Well, let's change Brazil," and was the biggest popular movement in the history of Brazil. Everybody went to the streets.
This was when?
2013.
Can I ask what triggered them to go to the streets?
Red it wasn't social, it was produced by Red the main broadcasting company in Brazil. It wasn't spontaneous, it was produced by a company.
Which
So
company?
I could disagree
Which
with
company?
whether that was right or wrong, but it was produced by a broadcasting company.
Which company was that?
Red
Which one? Global? No, sorry.
No,
It was much more complex.
Felipe is other not. Do you tell in the protests of Dilma? It's another. Before this.
Yes, but
We
it
have
wasn't
a
spontaneous.
protest about the price of the bus and the public transportation. This is the start point.
Was this the trigger?
It's not yet to
It was not-
against
It was not from campaigns, it was not for politics. They tried to raise the taxes on value of the buses in Brazil.
like principal manifestations in São Paulo. It's not it's other party. It's not PT, not other.
It was not about politics.
Not
at all.
politics. It's a spontaneous protest about the price of the.
It was the trigger.
So that was the spark.
Yes. Then some companies, then some TVs. 1 year later, started to work to do political stuff. But that was popular. And some of the parties from each side, left or right, some of the parties, they went crazy because they said, well, what should we do now? Because, and they said, you from the right doesn't represent us, and you from the left doesn't represent us. Nobody is representing us. They said clearly. And when they come, some guys on the right start to talk, and they say, go away, you don't represent us. And then the guy from the left said, no, you don't represent us also. Go away. This was 2013. After this, they made some political movements, but that was the first one. That was about the buses. That was from the people. We were there.
So can I rewind for a second? And these stories are fascinating, and it's not a matter of comparison. It's not comparing this system or that system. It's that we are learning, or we can learn from many places, not just America. I don't need to be the America trasher here. I'm just thinking, first of all, America is 320 million out of 8 billion people around the world. So again, with all due respect to America, there's a world of politics and money out there that we need to learn from. Brazil is one thing. Lebanon, last week, the Prime Minister resigned because of 2 weeks, 13 days of protests in the streets that were also put down to corruption. Now, could you say, would we have ever been struck by corruption in Lebanon is the big point? I'm not sure, but that's what people were saying. I feel that we need to learn from protest, real protest, and not that I put down, of course, knocking on doors or doing certain American-type things that we do in politics. But there's a good politics out there, and again, if we talk about inequality, and I take Thomas is the one I learned most from, about rich countries versus poor countries, about the institutions, about how the money goes, about the global, what did you call it, the global tax something or other, GMT or whatever, global something tax that you invented many, many years ago. But the point is, when we talk about equality, there are, I wouldn't say more important, but very striking things going on around the world that we want to learn from, rather than, I hear from you that you look to America as the model, or America and the UK. Why not look to Scandinavia? We can look to all sorts.
Yes.
And I think the main thing I would want to say is that we need protest, and hard protest. What you're doing, I think, is protest, even though it's not a very important goal in legislature and constitutional stuff, but the point is protest and how to protest strongly. We did, starting 2011, we were encountering what we now call in the literature square protests. So the squares started, it didn't start, Wall Street was one. That was one way of going, and then it sort of fizzled out. So you ask yourself again, why did that fizzle out? It seemed like the whole world was in the squares, and then they stopped being in the squares. So I would look to protest as my main key to somehow changing something, not rather than other things, but as something that we really have to take, be conscious of, especially in other countries where things have somehow happened, and they're happening right now. And we're reading now about amazing protests.
You know, I don't want to keep it, that's the last thing. Understands and appreciates and supports protests because, I mean, if you go back to what happened with Colin Kaepernick, you know, that is the history of the history of this country is based on dissent and protest, and the fact that that was the narrative, you know, that so many people object to a really just form of peaceful protest, which was in fact intended to be respectful, right? That to me says we don't have, so for me it's really, it is protest, of course, because we have to be disruptive, but we have to create a dialogue. And it's becoming very difficult to create that dialogue, and that's why I think this issue of campaign finance to me is so pivotal, because running, and that's why running, it's not just about knocking doors, but it was talking to people who are conservative, who will not, maybe not, you know, with progressive, will not agree on anything except this issue.
We see the same in Brazil. It's very
Except
difficult.
this issue, right? They're all in agreement, and that's where you start. I think you can actually have a dialogue around this issue.
Yes, yes.
And then the question of what it should look like could actually be a conversation. You know, because we have to build that culture of understanding what democratic practice looks like.
Perfect.
You know.
It takes too long.
I mean, I herald the amendment that you're supporting and trying to get enacted because it's sort of like a little bit like a boxing match. You're not going to deal with a knockout blow, a good one in the solar plexus. Not only weakens the other side, but it begins to get the crowd cheering for it. And one of the problems with America is the cloud. Not only realistically, but in the imagination of the American population. It looks up to the big guys. The little guy looks up to the big guys. We, I don't mean me or you, but we elected a billionaire. We treasure our billionaires. We have the best billionaires of the whole world. However, when you begin to attack the corporation, a lot, as I hope is happening in the impeachment, a lot of the spotlight comes down and people begin to notice other things. For example, the personhood of the corporation. A corporation can be sued for manslaughter, as was the electric company in California, and now it's under probation. I know some people in probation. As I mentioned to you, Thomas, they wear anti-blame bracelets. I expect the one to be around a pillar on the building of the electric company, and maybe if it's really committed, if it commits murder, maybe it could be electrocuted with its own electricity. In any case, it's a whole, that too is a scandal, but it's a scandal, we're going to die, but we accept it. There are scandals that we should not accept, and we should begin to reformulate. And so I think that this spearhead that you're driving is one of the things that can make us hopeful about the future, because goddamn, we really need to go through. And that means that somebody has to be doing something that really makes sense and has a chance. So, applaud you.
I'd like to change direction a little bit and go back to the very beginning of our conference here today and talk to Professor Felipe a little bit about technology and how it affects our political process. And you were kind of focusing on the good side of technology.
Yes.
But there's been a lot of bad, and I know in Brazil, with the last presidential election and with WhatsApp specifically, and maybe others. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we discovered one interesting thing on our research, because we thought in the first beginning when we started the research, we thought that the robots are doing the job and that create fake news and going to social media in Brazil. But at the end of the research, we discovered that the robots weren't fast enough. Fast enough. Because our families spread the fake news faster than the robots and globally. Because when we receive the fake news by WhatsApp, by a person from our family, we trust that it was true. Then we pass it on. that's why WhatsApp creates something that it's like a thing that you say that message was sent from another people, was not sent direct to you from these people, from this person. That's why WhatsApp creates that tool that tells you that the message was forwarded, was not from the first person that put up to you. Why? Because people were passing through, and we said something that was like, was things that you believe that in yourself, that you believe they're real, you do not confirm if they're real, right? Because you have those feelings before, so you just pass through.
You look for things that resonate with your feelings
Yes,
already.
yes. We call, in Brazil, we call viés de confirmação. It's a confirmation process. You only confirm what you already thought about. You know, we had something in McKenzie Law School. We had this book fair, and we passed through this process because we had this book fair. The students put up a book fair, and we were helping them. And there was this bookshop owner that he was a progressive left, and the students didn't call him to the fair. And the guy put a note in Facebook. Well, McKenzie prohibited my entrance, McKenzie Law School. So I called the guy. I said, "Oh my God, we didn't do anything. What happened?" He said, "Well, because I think I was censored." I said, "But our professors write in your editor, they publish with you. Our professors will publish with you." And he said, "Well, but somebody told me that," and I called the students, and they said to me, "Well, we didn't have space for this week, so we're going to call him to next week." And I called him with the students, and I said, "Well, they didn't call you this week, but they're going to call you next week." Oh, so there was a misunderstanding. And I said to him, "Okay, but you put in a note called censorship. That's and you guys said, well, but now I got so much attention from my publishing, so I'm not going to put it away. I'm going to fly on this. I'm going to surf on this wave." You know that they said it was this actress, the effect. Have you heard about the house, Barbra Streisand effect?
The what?
The Barbra Streisand effect.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, have you heard about it?
Yeah.
Because she had her
House in Malibu.
house in Malibu. Somebody took a photo, and she sued the magazine and said, You cannot take a photo of my residence, so I will sue you. She sued them. And everybody saw that photo and said, okay, she wants to sue the so we're going to print all over the net. So her house became the most famous house because everybody spread away. But now there are people, they are looking for the Barbra Streisand effect on the net. So I tell the guy, I was hoping that he was honest, but he said, oh, okay, now I'm getting more attention. I will put the note and stay.
So once again, it goes back to money.
Yes.
It's interesting, there was just an article this week in the New York Times by Timothy Snyder, who's here at Yale. There are two issues here. One is the spread of things and how fast you want it and you want to ride away.
Yes.
And the other is the truth. When I teach about truth, I'm usually somewhere between relativism and other. I don't know that we all know the truth and that it's there or anything like that. But what Timothy Snyder was saying was that the person who invented fake news, and this is not technology at all, was Hitler. And he gives these amazing examples, but the point is what people want to believe, and you provide
Yes.
that type of truth or
Confirmation.
fake news or whatever. And I think the technology is one more element here, very essential,
Yes.
because it's changed things. But the question is what we do with that idea of fake news, and who's to know, and who's to say, and what is it that we want to believe.
Perfect.
So yes, you know, it is so difficult to change minds, even in the classroom, as we know. If you have students who come already with certain opinions about whatever it is, it takes enormous effort to even have their ears unclogged to hear the reasons why this is not so. And of course, the use of the internet is horrendously potent in terms of building opinions that are false, as we know, predominantly among large group of people. So that's one issue. Another is I'm fascinated by the fact that with all this technological progress that we had for so long, that really democracy did not actually benefit from it, right? And but there's like a glimmer of hope, because also in the New York Times recently, now you know what we are reading, there was an article about Taiwan. And they decided to actually use, sort of create a separate sort of entity type of Facebook thing that only certain people could participate. And they were trying to reach a consensus on certain issues. The first issue was Uber versus taxi drivers, and it was, you know. So, but the critical thing was that you could not like it or not. I mean, you could not send a message to the person who puts the message up. Okay, so they were collating all those messages and trying to build a consensus, and they actually were very successful with this. So in this particular case, you know, the regular taxi drivers now have an app, but the Uber people have insurance, you know, those kinds of things. So it's a positive consensus. And they are thinking of utilizing this method in larger issues, more important. So perhaps we
talked about the conflict because we had the same conflict in Brazil. Last week, 2 weeks ago, we were at Google in Brazil. There's this headquarters of Google in São Paulo, Brazil. And we were talking about the conflict that went off on the media about the taxis and the Uber. And the head of the Google in Brazil said to us, well, that's an interesting conflict, but we are studying here in Google that, you know, in a few years, there's not going to be any of that.
No driverless car.
Yes, because we are working with the driverless car matter, and I think in 5 years they are not going to exist anymore. We are preventing this. I said, oh my God, we were talking about the issue because it wasn't our conflicts status, because it was a great conflict in Brazil about these two sides.
I'm interested in people's thoughts on the intersection between the technology and the social media and the protests. I was saying I was very moved a few years ago by the lawyers' movement in Pakistan, where lawyers came out en masse to defend the judiciary. I'm moved today by the Hong Kong protests. Sort of iconic picture of them cutting down the facial recognition tower. Just a very human protest. But when, you know, my book opened with Earth Day in 1970, 20 million Americans literally came out in the street, and it led to a wave of environmental law. But all Americans saw the same images. Same with the Vietnam War protests, the civil rights protests. The whole country shared and watched what was happening and had a national reaction. And I think there's a question about a continental country that has so many different cultures compared to, say, Hong Kong, where one mistake, one Earth Day protest that we dropped an accidental piece of paper, that would be blown all over the social media to say, look, a bunch of hypocrites, and they turn urban against rural, and they turn... And I wonder if protests, how we manage, because it's not, the protest is almost the theater that the social media will actually deliver to people. So it's more like, how do people understand what the reality is and then act as a political or social unity in some way. And so that's why I do come back to, it can't happen online. It's gotta, somehow we gotta reweave the civic fabric together.
If I could build off some of that, I think I'm one West Coast Bay Area, Silicon Valley representative here, and it does feel like a completely different culture. Completely different culture. And I was just thinking while hearing the last few comments, it's like, if we could replicate, actually David's suggestion for a next step for this forum, I know we first met in Oxford. I think if we could replicate this forum at Stanford, that's what I would recommend. Because at Stanford, there's an almighty cult called technology and money. There is no conversation around democracy.
Yeah.
None. It's about how they make more money.
Yes.
Like I was just chatting with an NGO leader here in New Haven last night. He's like, how are you doing? I was like, I want to move. I can't stand the Bay Area. Because it's all about cash. It's all about how you make money quicker. And there's this bubble cult. Just it's really disheartening. Because they don't care about that effect. That amplifying effect. You know, I know Jack Dorsey. He doesn't care. It was good business for him to do what he did about pulling political hits. That's good business. It's a minuscule amount of his bottom line. So he doesn't like Sutherland. He doesn't like each other. So you got 2 wins. Seriously, and it comes back to your point. Something that makes this country great is you can have dialogue, you can have debate, and I do love the fact that you're bringing together an issue that we can all talk to. That would be my humble next step recommendation. If we could replicate this type of dialogue around democracy, around a topic that we can all agree on, in a place like Stanford, which is the heart of Silicon Valley, that would be my recommendation. And I know people here, we could try to set something up, but to me it's so important that we start to dialogue and have these conversations, not just in our respective bubbles, but let's go burst that bubble. And we'll learn from that bubble, but hopefully we can infect them with thinking outside of just more money, but how can we actually share this as a society?
I mentioned ethics and values, and just to echo Mark's perspective, I won't talk too much about the American dream and part of the exceptional lifestyle that you have an opportunity to create, which is a wonderful thing. New migrants and Americans have an opportunity to do in this country. But I think the one big difference to where I come from in Australia is what we look up to isn't being exceptional. It's not being extraordinary. We actually celebrate the ordinary, and Mark was just in my hometown last month. So it's something we picked up from the British, tall poppy syndrome. If you're wealthy, if you're successful, don't flaunt it. You'll be chopped down to the knees, and that tall poppy syndrome becomes suspect. But it's a humility that's required for anyone in any form of elite position, power, or influence. And to come back to that ordinary values, so it is about celebrating your friends, your mateship, your family, your lifestyle, but not being driven by money and power, which really does create toxicity at times too. So I know you're talking about a billionaire in the White House. For us, our former Prime Minister, we've been through a few in the past 7 or 8 years. We've had a number of political turmoil, but he was a wealthy guy, and he had to really play down his wealth because Australians wouldn't accept a wealthy Prime Minister. You have to, we talked about our former Prime Minister, Gianpaolo, battlers, you have to be someone that's in there with the common people, and I think it's an important thing when you're talking about values. What are we teaching kids? So we're teaching kids that you can be famous, you can be like Kanye West, you can open Sunday services and people preaching and praying to you, or are we going Kim Kardashians? No, or are we actually celebrating ordinary people that are going out and providing civic duty, providing care, waking up, teaching kids, serving people in hospitals as nurses and not paying them minimum wages. And so that, when I spoke about everything values, I think it does come back to what are we actually celebrating?
Am I wrong? Is Rupert Murdoch not from Australia?
Yeah, that's why we sent him to America. and that is an apology. I do apologise for Rupert Murdoch, but
That was a very tall lobby of you.
yeah. Really.
Well, I mean, how is he viewed in Australia?
He's hated. Yeah. Well, I mean, sorry, polarisation exists in Australia too. So Rupert Murdoch, through News Corporation, owns a lot of TV and newspapers in Australia. So right-wing media support him because he's got an agenda and he owns, a lot of the country as he does here in the UK. But the ordinary Aussie doesn't think very highly of him. I think a lot of Australians wouldn't even recognise he's an Australian. I think most of us assume he's American.
We'll give him to you. We don't want to.
Yeah, well, we do apologise for Rupert.
Are the media consolidation laws better in Australia? Can he consolidate the way he has in the US?
He's done it. The laws got broken down from his pressure in 2014. So we don't have as many sort of media thing, but he's the owner of fair bit of it.
I think it's important that can't just be you can't posture this sort of idea that you are relating to either ordinary people or vulnerabilities. It has to be something that you're in fact doing. So Gandhi's philosophy of sort of moral reductionism, Leela Gandhi has a good book on this, The Politics of Moral Imperfectionism, that it actually requires you to be doing things like making sure you're you're in vulnerable communities, and that's why Gandhi was in the rural areas, to make sure that you're sort of reducing yourself to the level of the most vulnerable, and then working collaboratively. So what is it that you're doing as an individual then? It's outside of just gesturing that you can relate to the common person to actually make that happen. I think of Thomas as sort of an example of having been doing this for your whole career, basically. I still remember the first time we had met, I remember you flew out somewhere to an organization, Maximum, I think, it was an organization of a friend, because they were doing work on poverty reduction, but they didn't have any money to pay Thomas to go out there. He just did it. He did it because he's doing this work and he's actually taking that application and creating that kind of change systemically. So I think, when we see that, when we see what is our sort of individual role to make that happen, and how can we do that beyond the gesturing? Because a lot of people, and what's leading into this kind of right-wing populism too, is this idea that elites are controlling institutions in a way that is running contrary to ordinary interests, when in fact, right, they're manipulating that relationship as well. So.
And I love that. We all have a personal role to play. And I've intentionally, thankfully my job allows me quite a bit of flexibility. And when it gives me the chance to go anywhere that's not a coast, I jump at it. It's the first thing I'll do. And I've spent a lot of time the last 2 years in rural Illinois, rural Nebraska, rural Kansas. And it's just fascinating to show up and just sit down at a coffee shop and like, where are you from? California. Why are you here? It's always like, why are you here? And what's shocking to me is it was the exact same reaction I got when I lived in South Africa, 2005, 2006. And I would spend as much time as I possibly could in townships. And I'd sit at a bar, and they would, why are you here? I go, I'm here to learn. And that's exactly what I would say to them in Kansas. But what's shocking to me is it was the exact same reaction from a Shebit in South Africa to a coffee shop in Kansas.
If only Hillary had spent more time in the coffee.
I guess I'm trying to illuminate, I just noticed that, I just realized that. But I think we can vote with our feet too, by what we do and where we go and who we interact with, in the spirit by which we do so. Because literally, I want to know what's going on. Like, I don't understand, and I want to understand. But the best way we can start to do that is to have dialogue like this.
But I want to relate to what you said before, and then go back to the question of technology. We're drawing these bubbles, we're pretending not pretending there are bubbles, but I think we're generalizing about bubbles. You know, you say to me that in Stanford and on the West Coast, they're all rich and high techies, but no, there are, well, at least the people I know there are either in the philosophy departments or political science departments in universities who are all doing exactly what we're doing every day, wanting to go out there.
Perhaps how much influence do they have?
Well, okay, but we don't have any influence here either.
Let's change it, let's do this.
I'm not saying what to do, I'm just saying that when I think of the West Coast, or for that matter, both coasts, there are a lot of groups trying to work. The question is, what kind of strategy you might have, or what kind of, even tactics. I'm not done with that, except that's the only thing I can do. But I think we need to be careful about presenting ourselves. Yeah, we're the ones who are going to do things and we know what to do. And I think one of the places where we're most really befuddled at this point is what technology and social networking, what is going on. And what Monica was saying was touching our students. It's not just a matter of geography, it's a matter of age. There's something going on here that we, or at least I don't understand. How the messages go out, how you work on it, how you pay. That's why I was asking before about how much money goes into a campaign, and you said 80% of it, did you say 80 or 90, goes into media and social networking. Who knows how to do that? Who knows how to put the fake information in there or the true information in there to get my students to read the right things? And I think in some sense we might need to become a little more professional about those things rather than, well, not rather than, but we have to become professional about running these grand social networks that but all these people are doing, and we are in our little bubble, they are in other bubbles. I wonder how we get these bubbles together, and that's why technology for me is either a great promise or it will be our great doom, but it is going to go through technology because that generation, our students' generation, are only on that. They do not read one newspaper, and if they do read it, they read it here too, with the comments and with the answers. What's it called?
All the likes and the reviews and
yeah, exactly. And that's what runs what they know and how they are educated to react to these things. And I really think we're lost, or at least we don't know what we're doing.
And Alex,
Can I over here?
Yes,
Resident young person over here. Hi. Also, there was a very interesting question, I think, that we kind of glossed over before about the connection between social media and protest, which I think, and it also speaks to Anna, what you were saying before about the square movement, and then also Monica, what you were saying, but I think that there's this really interesting paradox that we see with social media now and engagement, where to some extent we're seeing that people are better able to connect on all of these different things that they find to be different social ills, whatnot, and then they're better able to find other people that share a kind of common sense of urgency with that. On the other hand, what I think is very troubling about it, and I think you also see this with why there may be more protests now in this period than previously, but those protests seem to have not become as accomplished in a way, that they haven't been able to really change the kind of conditions that are what made them arise in the first place. And I'm interested in what some of the Brazilian speakers here would actually say about it. But from the matter of, I think that social media has allowed people to feel as though they're more connected to movements than perhaps they really are, in a way that prior to having it, people really had to be engaged with their kind of local organizing committees and people like the Democracy for Connecticut, that kind of thing. And in a way, social media has kind of supplanted that feeling of connection to have much looser connections with the kind of different, their movements in a way. And I wonder what you would say about that with Brazil as well, and some of the, because there have been such extremely large movements, but what have they done to change the
Actually, we discovered that the first, I want to split into, the first, we discovered that we are in a bubble because the algorithms from Facebook, they know that we are listed to like those people and talk about those subjects. So in our Facebook only shows those people that we like and those people that they talk about the same subjects in the same way that we talk. So we are in a bubble. And we say, oh, everybody thinks like me. I'm right, because everybody's saying the same stuff that I'm saying.
Right.
So you live in a bubble. They do it for you. And the second one is that there was this case in Brazil because there was this theory that some of them tested in the Brazilians how can they affect Brazilian emotions. Put some sad stuff just to see if the people became to write sad things. So they use us as rats to try if maybe if we put online on his or her list something sad, he will be sad and write sad stuff. Let's test. And thank you so much. And there was the results that they said was this. People became sad looking about those pages and reading sad stuff and start writing sad stuff also.
But there's one aspect that I think was amazing in 2000 when we saw that movement, is that if you ask 10 people, they will give you 10 different reasons why they were protesting. So that was very, very interesting. I mean, I remember that I was watching TV, and you have a group of people going north, a group of people going south, a group of people going west, a group of people going east. I said, this is exactly what's going on. Everybody's going to everywhere, and you ask, why are you protesting? Oh, against the healthcare stuff. Oh, why are you protesting? Oh, because the salaries of the professors are too low. Why are you protesting? I don't know, I protest against everything. I'm protesting against the corruption. I'm protesting against my salary. I'm my employee, my employer. So that's the problem. And I think you touch a very important point. Because the link is very loose. Because you are not really engaged. You are only a kind of catharsis. I mean, like, this movement that I need to be part of it. But exactly part of what? Oh, I don't really know exactly. But I'm against something. So everybody's against something. So,
I really don't agree. I really think you're right. You get different answers, but there are reasons to protest. You can call them oppression. You can call them dissatisfaction with some people's situation. So for one person, it's cottage cheese, like in Israel, and for somebody else, it's those are the little symptoms. But there are
greatest feeling.
Yeah, feeling satisfaction.
But you protest because you can't take things any longer.
Yes.
And you go out in the streets.
We were fed up.
And they might give different answers.
But take what any longer? Sorry.
Pardon me?
You can take what any longer?
Whatever it is.
Well,
That's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I said. Whatever it is. I cannot say everybody has a reason to protest. That's what I'm saying. And sometimes you have a sparkling.
I don't know, I've been working a lot on the square protests in particular. But we get really...
China?
Well, no. In Germany, in the US, our Arab Spring originally, wherever it went.
Yeah, that's a good example. That's a very good example.
Right, and there is oppression, there are things that you can point to that get people out in the streets. It's not like all over the place, they'll just wave our hands and say things are bad.
Yeah, but what happened in Libya? I
A
just said.
lot, oh, okay, so things happen
Even
because of
example,
money and because of
Egypt.
political power. I'm not saying it was successful, I'm just saying the protest has a road to it. It's not all sorts of crazy people running around.
No, I
that
didn't
would
say,
say this is bad and that's bad.
I didn't say that anybody was crazy.
No,
I was talking about his assessment. That he said that before the social media,
You mean social
people
media
were
protests?
more engaged. You need to be a part of an organization. So I'm a part of an organization that will fight against the healthcare costs.
Right.
In the social media, I don't need to be a really strong part of anything. I don't need to have a link. I just need to be a part of a kind of bubble, a kind of a people. And as I said, everybody has something to be fighting against. And that is, I think the goal is different
Meaning
before the
investment.
social
So
media.
that's the core
That's a
of my
question for
question.
me. So the investment-
Exactly. I was trying to answer his
No,
question.
well, so-
Cool, but you know when people sign on, and we were just talking about this, because Jeff was talking about, you know, law professors signing on to a statement. So when people sign on to a statement, they feel like I've done something, I'm part of, I'm invested in this movement, I'm invested in, or whatever those campaigns are for, what was the bucket campaign? You know, people do something, post it on social media, and then the question is it actually do you feel as invested? I think you have to show up to feel invested, and I think there's a difference when you show up and you're part of an organization and you're actually networking with people in dialogue, in a community that's outside of social media. And I don't know because I don't use it because I'm not.
You're my child's age, and I'm talking about people who are 20, who are your no, I'm just laughing, but I'm saying you feel that way. They don't, and they're doing something different.
Well, so
They're
let-
doing something different.
I think that it's somewhere in between, but I think that those concerns are very much, the things that are motivating people to protest are no less valid. But what I think is the case is that perhaps because of there not being the kind of organizing direction and the groundwork that is laid for those movements, that comes from having those organizations that were able to help build those coalitions between people and bring them out to protest together. Even though you may have more people, the looser connection that people have to it because of the way that social media has organized them has changed the success of them and their ability to actually impact
The smart
things.
organizations, I'm not putting some down myself, smart organizations know that and they're working on it.
Oh,
and
yeah.
They know what they're doing. And Fatima was an amazing example yesterday.
I
Organizations are thinking about those things and you just have to treat technology as a tool for the kind of engagement you want.
I'd like to bring Isaac into the conversation here a little bit about Kenya. Could you tell us a little bit about, you know, what is the root of corruption in Kenya? I know in a lot of countries, if there's rich natural resources, you know, it seems automatic that you end up with haves and have-nots, the people controlling the natural resources and everybody else. Is that the root of corruption in Kenya, or where did it come from?
Well, one thing, corruption is as old as the time Kenya has been independent. But this corruption comes from opportunism, because some people who are sent to leadership in Kenya have got that feeling that to become rich, unaccessible rich, I must get to leadership whereby I can get money, enough money by looting public funds and get rich people. And of course, this trend has destroyed even the morale, the sequence of leadership in Kenya, because about 90% of people who want to lead in Kenya today are people who believe that if you want to become rich, you just don't be rich. I mean, be rich because there's money there to be taken away. And that's why in my speech I condemned even the rich nations, because in a way they are supporting or encouraging corruption. Because when you give someone the avenue to hide money, when I corruption, because that money, when I steal, I know that these guys here around me will see what I have, because I'll keep it away. They buy properties abroad, They keep the money abroad. So within the countries they are in, no one notices what they have. They don't have nothing. And they walk around and they just walk in the
somewhere else.
The money is somewhere else, it's far away. So that one is an encouragement of corruption, and which has actually destroyed the countries in Africa. And I would beg sincerely to the Western world and rich countries to take some measures on how they can curtail this buying of properties by leaders from especially Africa, and keep opening bank accounts abroad, because some of them don't have bank accounts until they ascend to power. There are lots of people there, they don't have an account, they don't have properties abroad, but as soon as they get into power, they have properties abroad, they have bank accounts abroad. Why are they allowed to open bank accounts when they are leaders in the country? You see, that is something that is not good. On social media, participating on social media and protests. In most of the African countries, social media sometimes helps a little with the middle class people and those elite people who are educated. But you find that most people are not educated. And so they're not well educated. And they don't have access. Some of them, computers are very rare in the rural areas. And you have they don't buy papers, newspapers. Some of them don't have money to buy newspapers. And of course, they are not able to engage in social media. But when it comes into protests, they are able to participate because they see it. It's there. People are going there. And even if you have not read anything, you just ask, what's going on there? Oh, they are protesting because commodities prices are very high. Oh, okay, I'm joining, I'm there. Let me go. You see? So, in some places, social media help. But in Africa, especially, it helps, yes, but not as much.
There's not enough connectivity.
Yeah, with the media. And again, you find that the leaders in Africa, actually, they are so stubborn. I'm sorry to say something. I think they are stubborn as Donald Trump, because Donald Trump sometimes don't hear what people say. Now, you see that people, you can talk on social media in Africa, but these leaders don't listen. They don't care. That one doesn't hurt. But when it comes to protest, they start now question, oh God, this is too much. Where is it leading to? This one might bring to an end of my leadership. So they try to act on protests more than social media. And again, they know that only few people engage in social media.
Like we are talking about the technology is very useful at present time, and technology is the solution of all the problems, inequality and poverty and corruption. The solution is the only technology. I am belonging from the backward country, that is Pakistan. Social media helps the poor people, those who are nobody is knowing them, but when any problem is taking place, social media is exploring these things, and those agencies who were not taking care of these people, but it was the responsibility of them, they tried to take the action against that. On the other hand, in the present time, a lot of other solutions have been given by the technology, because those who were uneducated, they have no access of anything, but if they are able to buy the mobile, they are using a lot of things, even uneducated people. So they are getting a message with the latest information, rules and regulations, just like in the Bangladesh. There was a Gramin Bank was first established for the poor people by the Dr. Muhammad Yunus. So he has promoted technology to give the access to those who were living in the fields and doing the labor work, but they were selling their products through the media in the markets. Previously, the middlemen, they were getting the benefit more than 50% or 60%. After that, this youth, they are getting benefit. So this is the technology. Yes, there are merits and demerits of everything, but merits are more and demerits can be controlled with the technology. Because if anything is going wrong, yes, at presently, he is doing wrong, but he can be captured after an accident. So cybercrime agency, they can control this, but it is more beneficial. In future, everything will be controlled by only this technology, nothing other.
Yeah, I would like to say something, but battles. We talk from our battles. Why? Social media. Yes, Brazil, I'm from Argentina. I work with a foundation in Brazil, Sujata Foundation. I work with the very poor people, one of the most poor neighborhoods in Brazil. So I'm directly in contact with them. When you go to the houses, they don't have food in their fridge, nothing, literally. So when you ask about social media, I can understand middle class people or upper class people having access to IT and mobile and so on, and having the knowledge to use those means. That's the problem we have in Latin America, Africa, and countries like Pakistan. First of all, some people don't have access to these means. And secondly, they are not aware how to use them. That's one thing. Another point I wanted to mention in Brazil, how this video we're coming left now, demonstration. Sometimes they are spontaneous, but what we see on the news most of the time is not. Why Brazil? Bolsonaro right now, and we can talk about the natives and the policies he's carrying right now with natives, black people, the quotas he's planning to put at university level. We can talk about what he's doing with Amazonia and the natives there. We can talk what he's doing with children right now, because my foundation has problems because of Bolsonaro. His government asked Sujata to step down from that foundation because she was too popular. And his government was supported not by social media, by a church, Iglesia Universal. Iglesia Universal right now infiltrated all over Latin America. Argentina is the next step. So they are having, people from very poor backgrounds through religion. That's the means. So it's not social media, it's religion through Iglesia Universal. Edir Macedo, we can do research, it's very easy to check. Edir Macedo was one of the main founders behind Bolsonaro for the election. He is the one behind Iglesia Universal. So I agree social media has a place. But where and when and what group of people we are talking about? In Latin America, are there to say food for people is not that important. There are other things such as religion and the way you play with people in order to get what you want. So we can see demonstration, and I question, and it's a question, whether those demonstrations are a true reflection of what they want, or whether they are simply a way to tweak whatever the government wants to do, or whatever a candidate wants to do against someone like Lula. So there was corruption with Lula, of course. There is corruption now, yes, with Bolsonaro.
Yeah,
so that's why
less.
I wanted to Kenya and Pakistan here. Because I see that sometimes we get to talk from the American perspective, the Australian perspective, but that's not our reality. So I always tell my students everywhere I go. I teach philosophy, philosophy is not my passion, but that's not the reality. I'm practical enough to recognize that we need to do something individually. So my way of doing that is going once a year to the foundation, living at Pedra de Guarativa as they live with them. I'm trying to teach them, trying to educate them, and trying to incorporate them in what we do here. Because if not, our work will remain here on the line on our CV. Another presentation, we've been to Yale, but what about the poor people? Are we solving anything? And that's my question. Are we solving anything?
I do think both social media and the protest, they are similarly important because they all contain messages of change in most countries. And so, personally, I would recommend that if it's a place that needs social media, putting up things in the internet, put them up. And if it needs a protest to put a point somewhere, get the protest there. Because all are aimed at one thing. Can we bring change on such and such a thing? And if you can do that, I remember sometimes like I think 2-3 years ago, I went and camped at New York at the headquarters of the United Nations for 3 days. And after my protest, 1 month, all the money that had been looted in Kenya through a certain scandal called Angolism was frozen in Switzerland. You see? But before that, we had retail, we had trade, but it was not working. But that one protest made a difference. And money was frozen. You see? So, where a protest can be taken, let it be taken. Where Facebook or what cannot, let it work. Because they all all are going to one place. It's like denominations we have. There are so many denominations, churches, but they pray what? One God. They all go to one place, God. So, social media, protest, they all go one place. Well, it is advantage and the poor.
There are cases that those who are unknown, very poor, nobody is helping them. If anybody is seeing that activity and taking the footage, giving on the social media, even he is going to the police agencies, they don't register their case. But through the social media, after a few days, automatically they are ready to register their complaint. So, very helpful. Yes, along with the negative things.
So I think it's something to keep thinking about is, and to your question ultimately is, how can we use both social media as a tool for social advocacy, but somehow incorporate the people, true collaboration, right, to reduce vulnerability instead of coming in and setting an agenda. And I think that's what we're all working on. We will continue.